So, hello everyone. I'm so glad to have Jeffrey from UK today. He's a very excellent and very important role to taking in charge of child safety now. So, Jeffrey, thank you for joining on this interview.
Thank you so much for having me, Kohei, and it's absolute pleasure to see you again and to also participate in this chat with you today.
Awesome. So, first of all, I'd like to start his profile. Jeffrey DeMarco is a senior policy and insight professional with expertise in forensic psychology and criminology. The majority of his operational policy and insight work explores the intersections of psychology and technology. This has included the work for the European Commission enhancing the policing of online child sexual abuse, investigating the youth justice system, and digital safety for UNICEF across the MENA region and Eastern Africa, and establishing educational programs for parents and young people focusing on digital literacy, improving partnerships between local communities and military forces in conflict zones, including Iraq and Afghanistan, while developing well-being hubs for families to access health, education, immigration, and criminal justice support, and assessing the psychopathology of adolescent victims and offenders of violence presenting to the police and statutory service. He is a currently Save the Children UK senior technical advisor for protecting a child from the digital harm. So again, it's a delight to explore the conversation with you.
Very, very exciting, and thank you for the introduction.
Yeah, amazing. And as a first topics, I'd like to ask about your history and background. So why did you start to study psychology and its safety? Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, of course, Kohei. And it's a really good question, especially for anybody that's thinking about pursuing a career in it. When I was very young, I used to read a lot of novels about detectives in investigations and how they would make educated guesses around who had committed the crime or what it meant to support victims depending upon how they were presenting. And so I really, it was a really big part of my childhood reading those novels and my adolescence. And then when I got into university, I was really quite interested in using that skill set of understanding or human behavior, um, and how it intersects with the criminal justice system, with keeping people safe. And so that's kind of what my primary purpose was. It was to go and to develop my psychological skills, to understand the theory about what it means and why people do certain things, and then to apply that more specifically in policy development, in program development, in product development. When we start to think about technology and everything, it's about the intersection of human behavior and theory with actual quite sterile technological devices and programs and products. So it was all about, using our understanding of the brain and human behavior and how that applies in different parts of our lives. So when I kind of finished university, and I went on to graduate school, I pursued it more specifically into criminality, so looking at forensic psychology. And there what I was interested in was very much what the different factors are that predict somebody either committing a crime or acting in a deviant way versus not committing that crime. So, kind of looking at what were the protective factors or what were different ways we could bring somebody down a different pathway so they wouldn't commit a crime. And it was using non-traditional methods. So, for example, we know that a lot of young people have problems with authority figures and the police. So, how can we make sure that those young people at risk of committing a crime still have access to adults in a meaningful, constructive way, still respect authority and build confidence and trust, but also don't need to interact with the police because the police might ruin that relationship. And so it was looking at non-traditional ways of keeping and giving people equal opportunities. That included young people who committed sexual crimes online, as well as young people who might be at risk of being radicalized. And then I went and did my doctorate following all of that, Koei. It was really quite powerful to like work with different government institutions in different countries and different police forces and different stakeholders and understand all the mechanics of how the policies written and how we are able to, develop new rehabilitation programs. And that's when I started doing more and more work in protecting children online. It was kind of right after my doctorate, working on a very important project across Europe with a whole bunch of different police forces and Europol, where we were trying to do two things. We were trying to understand the gaps the police had in protecting children from online crimes to ensure that we could provide them with the training and the skills acquisition they needed. But it was also trying to understand young people's experiences of online harms and what it meant to them, especially as they enter into young adulthood. So we asked a lot of young people, when you were between 12 and 16 years old, what did that mean to you when that happened? And it was a really powerful piece. And the rest is history. I've stayed in a number of different roles, but all very much linked to protecting children from digital harm. And that is where I eventually got to Save the Children, sitting as their senior technical advisor for protecting children from digital harm. And that's a global role. I'm part of the global programs team, which means the majority of my work is not UK focused. It's looking outside of the UK at different opportunities and how we can support young people. And Kohei, not all the bad. It's not telling children they can't use the internet, or it's not saying parents should use blocking features. It's trying to get parents, carers, teachers, and children to understand the immense benefits of technology, but to engage in a literate, critical, engaged way so that they at least know what the risks are and are able to navigate those risks with a certain level of understanding.
Yeah, that's so interesting story that you're gonna come into the space of the kids' safety. And your coverage of your role is very broad to overseeing of the global trend to save the kids' child safety. So I'd like to add the next question about your current role and work. So you work on the very important role at the Save the Children. So could you share about your current work with this organization?
Yeah, of course, Kohei. And it's really exciting to join such an important organization. I mean, I am, most of your listeners will likely have heard of Save the Children. We're one of the largest international not for profits or non-governmental organizations in the world. And our primary focus across every jurisdiction that we work in is around children's rights. It's around children's participation and it's around children's agency. It's making sure that we are advocating and delivering work that ensures that every child has a fair and equal start to life, free from violence, able to learn, and able to have those equal opportunities. We work in a lot of different contexts. We have, colleagues that focus very much on health programs, climate programs, lots of work in education. But one of the big areas that I work on or in specifically is around child protection. And what child protection generally means is looking at how we ensure the systems, the structures, and the people and the processes that are in place that are meant to allow children to have those powerful, equal, fun, safe lives. Um, those mechanisms don't lead to further harm to those children. So that can happen, or that can be tackled in lots of different ways, Koei, as I'm sure you can imagine. With my senior advisor for protecting children from digital harm, My focus is very much on system strengthening. What can I do with government, with other CSOs and NGOs, with children and families themselves? What can I do to make sure that everybody is able to contribute to the product to ensure that a child's online experiences are beneficial and safe to them? So, as an example, Kohei, a few of the things that I'm thinking about right now are looking at where we know that digital literacy might be really important, not just for the children, but for the teachers and the parents. Now, we've all been talking about digital literacy for a very, very long time, but it's kind of making sure that we're implementing it in a way that also allows flexible learning because the technology changes so quickly, right? Just giving somebody a bit of curriculum around this is how you stay safe online might change dramatically a year later, a few months later. Um, Another big thing that we're thinking about right now, Koe, is around privacy, and that's why it's really, really quite happy to be here with you today. It's running programs so parents are thinking a little bit more about their own privacy, but also the data they're sharing even before the child is born. So thinking about when, a new mom and dad are expecting their child and they've built the nursery or they're taking pictures of the baby bump as they're putting those photos on social media, the that's giving away a lot of information about them, about their journey, and that is an individual's right. I'm not saying it's not a good thing to do, but right away, that's going to be informing the algorithms that tell them about the books they should be getting or the devices they should purchase or the programs they might want to go on, which will then directly affect the child once the child comes and how the child may be exposed to screen time, how the child's data or toys or clothing or activities are informed, and how they might be presented on social media. So again, lots of my role is coming up with ideas for programs like this to not be harmful, to not be exclusionary, to not be isolating to people, to not make them scared of the internet and technology, but to equip them with the knowledge, the awareness, the confidence, and the understanding of what it is and what it can do for them. Lots of the work right now is trying to upskill parents and teachers around the benefits of AI in teaching children and in helping their children kind of achieve good educational outcomes, whilst also making sure they're aware of some of the concerning elements of AI. Things that, how much, what is the AI doing with the data that they're sharing with it, the information that they're sharing with it? Um, what or how can bad actors use AI to groom children? We know there's been quite a few cases of bad actors training the AI to mimic how a 12 and 13-year-old would type to each other. So when that adult approaches that child, they can approach them using the same language a 12 or 13-year-old would expect. We also know that recently I was at an event that ChatGPT is being used for the creation of financially motivating sexual extortion manuals. So the creation of these manuals to assist bad actors in tricking young people more easily and getting away with it. But we also know AI can do a lot for young people. It can give them really quick answers to information. We know that there's companion apps that are very helpful in kind of letting children explore perhaps their gender or their orientation or questions they don't feel comfortable talking to their parents about. We also know that some of the companion apps might be more appropriate for isolated children that don't necessarily have friends in the physical world. Not appropriate, but it might replace or provide them with something that they don't necessarily have. There's concerns with that, though. There could be the development of emotional dependencies. And we again don't know what's happening with the secrets, with the data that they're sharing. So lots for parents and people and communities to think about there. But like we were saying, Koe, it's always changing. Part of my job is to try and keep my thumb on the pulse of the community, the tech community, and understand where the emerging threats are, what the new platforms for use are, how are parents being taught about harm A, which educational technology platform is being used, how can we use technology in a humanitarian crisis to keep children in education, what can we do to help police forces be more clued up into all of this. Am I able to understand what young people do when strangers approach them? It's so many things in so many jurisdictions with so many different policies and laws and procedures and legislation around privacy, legislation around crimes against children, different levels of internet quality and speed and accessibility. It really does require taking a country by country specific approach, but it's very rewarding. And the majority of my work is that I work with different country offices in developing programs that meet a need based off of some of the things that I was just sharing with you. But we co-produce it together. If I were in Cambodia, or if I were in Laos, or if I was traveling down to Kenya, it would be me working with my colleagues in safeguarding, in child protection, in gender inclusion, in humanitarian. It'd be working with them to co-develop a program that meets the best needs of those local children and families.
Yeah, that's amazing work. Then the spreading the technical support to the local community, which is very important to enhance the basic literacies for the like practitioners to give a child and a kids the opportunity to help to use the new technology from your work. So that's very amazing.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, as a coverage of your past research, that was so interesting about the contents moderation. That's becoming so normal. The everybody just started to use social medias online, be connected to each other. But the problem is like there is a lot of abusive contents at the moment. So I'd like to ask about the how has the online content moderation risk is becoming arising from the beginning, and I'm happy to ask about your points that we need to care about it. So could you share about it?
Yeah, of course, Koe. No, it's good stuff, and it's I guess there's a few things to consider, and there's a few complexities with moderating and curtailing content. So for your listeners, moderation can happen on a number of levels. As we know, it can happen through humans, but it can also happen at using AI or using machine learning to ensure that certain keywords or certain kind of patterns of content are not allowed or are removed if they're posted by a user. You can also use hashing technology for moderation. So when you identify harmful videos or images, you are able to put code behind it essentially, share that with other agencies, and make sure that that harmful content cannot be duplicated and triplicated. Um, and there's also some work that can happen at the ISP level. So with the internet service providers, having certain blocks and certain filters that try and prevent bits from happening or getting into a national infrastructure. So I know, for example, in Korea, which is a very that does have high levels of regulation for content. Adult content at that very top level is nearly impossible to acquire. Now there are ways around it, of course, and that is always going to be the thing, and that's why we always need to work together with government, with tech, because the bad actors will always find a way, and we're always going to need humans involved in this process. So I think that's the important bit. Content moderation also happens at a number of different levels. There are moderating teams that work specifically for lots of big technology companies and social media firms. There are then volunteer moderators that kind of do it out of the goodness of their hearts / community standards, or are parts of much smaller social media platforms, much, much, much smaller ones, and they do it because they have offered their support. They won't see the same volumes of as harmful content as those working for the big tech companies, but they still will. And then there's the third party moderation firms, often computer solution firms that offer wider suites of support in IT. These are often outsourced by large companies into other countries, such as lots in the Philippines, lots in India, lots in Africa. And they're meant to take down the content, but that has its own level of complexities because they're working in very different jurisdictions with very different working conditions, often for much lower financial rates, and therefore have to hit much higher targets, therefore are exposed in theory to a higher volume of harm. So all of that to say, what's important for the humans in all of this? Well, it's quite normal to not be okay after you've been exposed to really bad stuff. So if you spend all day looking at child sexual abuse material or indecent images of children, it's okay not to feel okay about that. There are some issues, mind you, with doing that chronically and cumulatively over an extended period of time. That cumulative exposure to traumagenic content can be very harmful to somebody's worldviews, somebody's general well-being. So we talk a lot about those that work in content moderation as being exposed or experiencing both secondary and vicarious trauma. Secondary trauma being very similar to PTSD, or the symptomology is very similar to PTSD. It will manifest through hypervigilance, so kind of being always anxious, but equally through intrusive thoughts. So having, images pop into your head outside of working hours that you wouldn't necessarily want there. Vicarious trauma manifests in a somewhat different way. It's a more long-term, enduring cognitive change. So what we see with some of the content moderators we work with is they may no longer want children, actually. Not that that's an example. There's many examples because they have seen this quite harmful content to children over a direct kind of, long period of time. They might not trust strangers as much as they used to because what they've seen over time is kind of the worst of people. They might have a more cynical view. So, again, all of that to say, quite a normal reaction, but we need to do something about that. We need to do something about that for two reasons. The first and easier reason I've kind of already explained to you, which is no matter how good the technology is, we are always going to need humans to look at this. We're going to need humans to look at it to make sure that we're not censoring people. We're make sure we're taking down the right content, not the wrong content. If a person wants to put their images of their family holiday up online, that should be okay. There are certain mediums online where you do have the freedom to present legal adult content. And again, we shouldn't necessarily take that away depending upon the jurisdiction. But, this is abuse material we're talking about now. This is criminal material. So humans will also be needed because in order for that evidence to be used by the police or by the judicial system in trying to prosecute a case, you will have needed people to look and compile that together. And without the people only using machine learning or AI, that means there'll be less trust, less confidence in the actual evidence pack. But the other reason why we need to be aware of all this, the negative of this, is because if we don't actually take care of these content moderators, then they're going to make mistakes, right? And that's going to lead to more harm to children. And they're going to become inefficient because they're going to be burnt out. They're going to be going on sick leave. They're not going to be functioning at 100% because of ignoring their mental health and their psychological well-being. So a lot of the work that I've been advocating for Kohei is very much been with managers, lots of content moderators from across the globe, but also with human resources and onboarding teams. So treating psychological well-being in the workplace as quite fundamental for a company that does this work in their induction, making sure that they talk a lot about resilience, adversity, the manifestation of trauma, and to make sure they have easy to access resources for their staff. Because what my research has demonstrated is that you might not use the resources, but knowing they're there serves as a really good protective factor generally, but also as a catalyst for talking to your colleagues and your managers, which indirectly then provides you with some protection. So the last bit we're working on as part of this program of well-being for content moderators, Kohei, is around a psychoeducational self-help tool which would allow a content moderator free of charge and anonymously to log in, do a little bit of a risk assessment, very light touch, just around some issues around secondary and vicarious trauma. Tell us how often they feel a certain way, and it gives you a nice little visual that demonstrates where you might be slightly more psychologically healthy versus where you might be having some challenges. So, as an example, I did it recently as a test, and I had low levels of difficulties in my relationships, but high levels of exhaustion and burnout. So, what it then lets me do is click on the exhaustion and burnout, and it takes me through some psychoeducation and gives me some tests to work on for a week and to see if I can try doing some very basic things. It's not meant to replace clinical supervision. It's not meant to replace actual professional help, but it is meant to hopefully give people a little bit more resilience for these men and women that, I like to refer to as our digital first responders. They are the first people that are exposed to this content once a harm is created, besides the victim or survivor. And yet, we often don't perceive them in the same way as a lot of other agencies, whereas they're actually really, really critical. And them not being able to do their jobs is quite fundamentally problematic.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that from the different perspective, especially for the deepen into more scientific approach. That's been a very significant to preventive of the risk from the kids or any
Yeah.
vulnerables to make it more safer. And there is just some conversation about these kind of the actions, especially focused on the kids and the childs. We call it a CSAM. It's a kind of the abusive contents might be the preventive. But the problem is if the government is trying to know more about it on the social activations, there is some concerns about the privacy and fundamental rights. So, from a perspective, does the system guarantees the children's privacy and safety altogether?
It's a really, really interesting question. It's one we talk about a lot. I won't have a very, very, very clear answer for you, but there are some thoughts and thinking around it. It's important, I think, in the first instance to understand that there is not a very high rate of victim and survivor identification in some of these investigations. And the reason I'm raising that, as in relation to CSAM, is because we often don't know who the young people are. And what that suggests to me is that elements of their privacy is just not possible to identify, right? So it's not, those personal identifiers are not being immediately captured. That's one point. There's a second point, mind you, which I don't agree with, which is when we're working on investigations with some of the big tech companies, there is an argument that they will not share a certain profile's information with us because it breaches their client rights and it breaches their privacy. As far as I'm concerned, they have broken the law. That does not mean they do not have access to their fundamental rights still. I completely appreciate that. But in considering the risk versus harm balance in this instance, a harm and crime has been done to a child. Therefore, I do not see an issue with breaching those privacy rights of that particular client in that particular circumstance, if that makes sense. It's for me, it's again philosophically exploring the harm risk balance. And here, the harm, the potential risk to children outweighs the harm of that person's privacy being breached, if that makes sense. That said, you in this space will hear a lot of what I call tech bashing. And what I mean is a lot of NGOs and organizations saying tech don't help, tech don't do this, tech don't do that. They're not, part of the solution. That's simply incorrect. Tech are a very big part of the solution. A lot of what they do, they can't necessarily publicly discuss with us because it's commercially sensitive, it's innovative, it's interesting, it's new, but also they don't want the bad actors to know what they're doing. So publishing what we're doing in prevention for behavioral signals detecting or, new ways that the machine learning can assist, that would be foolish. Tech are working very closely with police forces, with CSOs, NGOs, and with children to create solutions. So let's recognize that there is good work that's happening. Let's also recognize that tech with certain organizations, like police and governments, do have memorandums of understanding for sharing information, so that investigations can happen whilst not allowing for giant breaches of data and um, still securing the privacy rights of its users. So there are grounds where we are able to get the information, the evidence that is needed for an investigation and not allow it to be compromised or the wider client space to be compromised. Um, so all of that, CSAM crosses a lot of these different sections, if that makes sense. We're talking about the actual young person's personal identifiers all the way up to the perpetrator's personal identifiers and their rights as a client on a tech company. Um, what's really important for me, mind you, with what government and NGOs are doing in preventing CSAM is they need to be very aware of the content they're harvesting. So all of the good hashing, all of the good sharing of these databases, all of the good, investigative teams that are doing victim ID and taking things down, what one needs to hope that they are securing that data in an appropriate way and that they are maintaining the privacy of their victims and survivors in appropriate safeguarded ways so that that data isn't just being shopped around everywhere. Um, I'll stop there, Koa. You might have some follow-up questions, but that's me looking across the lifespan of CSAM from the moment of a child being groomed into producing it to the moment that it's going and being investigated. You hear stories actually once in a while around adult survivors who were abused as children and their content is still out there and what that means for them, about how the privacy of certain perpetrators and clients was 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 more important than the fact that this woman's image as a 14-year-old has been circulating around the internet for 15 years now, and how every time that image is looked at, that actually is another experience of abuse. And the actual psychological weight of that on those survivors, knowing that hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of people have seen that abuse imagery of her. Um, and what it means to be worried about walking down the street and somebody being like, I saw a picture of you, that obviously the cost, the emotional and the psychological and the financial cost to that individual is massive. And it brings me back to kind of that debate on balancing risk and harm, balancing privacy rights versus what the wider risk of harm to the population could be. But I'll stop there and allow you to follow up on anything you might find interesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree with the balancing is the key challenge for us right now. Even we need uh, push away the criminal actions, but the privacy is very fundamental for all, especially for the kids or child who
Yeah.
needs more very sensitive informations. I
I
think,
think it's, if you
yeah.
don't mind,
Mhm.
Kohei, I'll just add a really quick bit. It's really important to educate both parents and their kids around privacy because parents' idea of privacy is often don't let your kids on the internet, which isn't helpful. But a children's idea of privacy is, they might think they're being really private, and they might think, for example, that they have a private account, so and their mom and dads can see that account, but they don't recognize little things like taking a photo with your friends for your Facebook profile, wearing your school uniform, and having the logo right there. And even if your account's private, people can still see that picture and then know what school you went to and which friends went to that school. So it's just having a really, we think we're a lot more private than we are online. And my argument is you can be as private or not as you want to online. You just need to make sure that you're educated and that you're having meaningful conversations about it.
Yeah, that's very, very good insights. So you mentioned at the beginning from about your own work, the Save the Children is doing a program worldwide, and we see that a lot of the programs has the very good knowledge to share and essence to learn. So could you share about the one or two good use case for us to learn about any practices to be preventive of the harms from the kids or
Yeah.
children? So yeah.
Yeah, no problem, Clay. It's a really good question. First of all, I will make a shout out to Save the Children more widely. If you visit our global website, we do have a resource center that's open to the public, and you are able to kind of search stuff across our different programming, not just the stuff I do. It can be about, you know, schools in Congo or, being a climate activist in Bolivia. So anybody that's interested, do take a look at our resource center. It's got a lot of good information. Um, but the plug I'll give right now is for the last 2 years, we delivered a project program with Safe Online, funded by Safe Online, that was in 7 countries. So this was, I always get them wrong, Koi, so hold on for a sec. It was in Kenya, South Africa, Philippines, Cambodia, Australia, Indonesia, and I'm missing one, but that's okay. It's the report is there, and it explored young people's experiences of strangers online. So overall, across the countries, we co-produced workshops with young people and facilitators to discuss some of these issues. And interestingly, and this is the insight I'll give you, really powerfully, one of the most powerful kind of results was that the majority of young people speak to strangers on a daily basis when they're online. Now, you could use that as a really negative point. Like, oh my gosh, don't let your kids online. They are talking to strangers and bad people. But actually, when you dive deeper into the findings, you can actually see that it's the young people feel confident and they're cautious when they're engaging with strangers online. And they have a triage system in which they're able to look and explore for themselves. All right, this is a known known, this is an unknown known, right? They're able to kind of put these strangers into categories, and depending upon those categories, the young people engage in real-time risk assessments around what this group of people is allowed to say without me going stop, what this group of people is allowed to say without going stop, and what this group of people are allowed to say without going stop. So actually, we need to give the children a lot more credit for their own decision-making processes, help them navigate those decision-making processes, but equally make sure that they know where to go when things go wrong. If we just treat them like children, then they're going to not come to us. They're going to go to other children. So I would urge everybody to take a look at that report. It's publicly available on the internet. It's the grooming report. It was launched a couple months ago. And lots of really good recommendations from children in it. Lots of recommendations around how they want some technology companies to provide real-time live safety messaging in the app or in the game whilst they're in it, not, oh, click on this and we'll get back to you in 24 hours. Or how the young people themselves need and want teachers and parents to be better about e-safety. So why don't we let the older children teach e-safety to parents and teachers who can then be available for the younger children? So lots of really good children participatory involved helping give some meaningful recommendation. And that's just one example of some of the really good global work that we've been doing.
Yeah, that's a good work in sharing the knowledge. So I will put the link, then everybody can see that after this talk. So that's very amazing. So finally, I wanted to ask you about the short message for listeners, because in a tech space, in a kids and a child is becoming so change the norms. For example, in Australia has been a stop in like social media under the 16. It's a big impact in the industry as well. And we have a lot of the things to consider, just like disinformation, misinformation issues, and the impact to the child or the kids. So, Jeffrey, do you are working on the core center of this very important role? So, could you share about the message for listener?
Yeah, of course. I want everyone out there to remember, whether you're in the southern tip of Africa or the very north of Finland, or as far as where you are, Kohei, in Japan right now, or in California, I want everyone to remember that technology is a fantastic, useful thing. It makes and can make our lives more efficient, better, and make generations of better connected individuals. So the fact that we can do this podcast so easily is such a pleasure. Getting to connect with you again after a few months, it has nothing but positive outcomes for us. So thinking about children in particular, exactly that. The wealth of technology is of so much great use to young people. If we do not learn as adults and important, trusted people in their lives how to harness it and protect them properly, then we cannot ensure their safety. But blocking it is not the solution. Taking it away is not the solution. There are actual, real social ramifications for not letting them socialize online, learn online. There are potential shortcomings of this. They might not make the same groups of friends. They might not have access to the same content and educational resource. So we just need to all work together to make sure that we can do what we can do to protect them as much as possible and ensure they know where to go when they need help. Um, always pops into my mind right now with this is that we need to subscribe to a public health approach of keeping children safe online. All that means is it's not just the tech companies' jobs. It's not just the police or the regulators or the government. It's not just the parents' job. It's not just the teacher's job. And it's not just the children's job. It's everybody's job. None of those individual groups of people can do it alone. We need to make sure that people are working together, funding together, thinking together. And a way I like to think about it is it's not just the social media companies that need to be involved. We need to think about the whole ecosystem. Everybody, the ministries of justice, the regulators, the banks, the telecoms companies, the satellite and submarine companies that lay the fiber down. Everybody has a role to play in providing this immensely useful resource. Um, let's not take it away to young people at their detriment. Let's ensure that we're able to control it. The big thing for me is we really need to figure age assurance out. If we can figure age assurance and age verification out appropriately, then it can be easier. Issues, as we've talked about before, around privacy, around data sharing, around what that means, have different institutions having all your data. But we need to go back to balancing the risk and the harm conversation. I'm not saying that I have the answer, but that would help deal with this so much better is figuring out robust, rigorous age assurance. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you for your very wonderful and very important message to empower the listeners. I'm so glad to have a conversation, Jeffrey, again here, and I'm happy to share your message to all the who is been fighting against of the harms for the kids and child. So thank you for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kohei. It was an absolute pleasure to get the opportunity to see you and to speak about both my organizations and my experience, but also just to contribute to this really great resource that you have for people that are thinking or working or, planning in this wider area. So thank you very much.
Thank you.